scrolls over here. Okay. You're going to have to scroll in, I think, Joe.
Yeah, I could do that.
All right. So, tonight we're going to talk about Buddha's ethical teachings again. And one of the noteworthy texts in the early tradition, one of the famous texts from the Pali Sutras, is called the Dhammapada, or Way of the Dharma. And it's been made into a separate book, and there are, I think, 100 translations or more of the Dhammapada. It's one of the most translated of the Buddhist texts. And it's a basically simple kind of poem talking about virtue from the Buddhist standpoint. So we've had before the instructions on avoiding the 10 non-virtues. So the basic Buddhist ethical teaching is that not taking life, not taking what's given, not engaging in sexual misconduct, and not harsh speech, not false speech, not idle chatter, and not slander. And then the ones of mind too: no ill will, no wrong view, no envy. So those are the kind of basic ethical teachings. But here in the Dhammapada, you're going to sort of see, kind of in a slightly different way as we go through here. It's focusing more on the sort of like the sort of essential attitude or way in which you as a Buddhist practitioner approach the world. So we'll start here. And this is just the first of 12 verses. The first 12 verses of a much longer text. We are what we think, having become what we thought. Like the wheel that follows the cart pulling ox, suffering follows an evil thought. While happiness follows the pure thought, like a shadow that never departs. We are what we think, having become what we thought. He abused me, he mistreated me, he defeated me, he robbed me. Having such thoughts keeps hatred alive. He abused me, he mistreated me, he defeated me, he robbed me. Releasing such thoughts, hatred ceases. For hatred does not cease by hatred at any time. Hatred only ceases by love. This is an ancient truth. The world does not know that all things come to an end here. Those who do, their quarrels cease at once. One who lives for sensation, senses uncontrolled, immoderate, careless, lacking energy. The tempter Mara breaks, just like the wind breaks a frail tree. The one who is mindful, senses controlled, moderate, careful, energetic, cannot be overthrown by Mara, just like a mountain is untouched by a storm. The path to deathless is awareness. Unawareness, the path of death. They who are aware do not die. They who are unaware have never lived. Sorrow now, sorrow later. Happiness now, happiness later. The virtuous person is happy in this world. They are happy in the next. They are happy in both. Those who put on robes without renouncing samsara within, disregard self-control and truth, are unworthy of the robes. Those who have truly renounced all defilement and are well-grounded in virtues, disciplined and honest, these alone are worthy of the robes. Those who fail to distinguish the non-essential from the essential, and the essential from the non-essential, will, caught in thoughts and desires, fail to attain the essential. But those who correctly realize the essential as essential and the non-essential as non-essential will, discovering the truth beyond words and desire, attain the essential. And why don't you take it up to the top? And
okay. I'll go back to presenting.
I can just read it from my copy.
I can go back to it.
So, this book, the Dhammapada, starts with the line, "We are what we think." So, with that line, we definitely are in the realm of the Buddha's text. And here in the very early Buddhism, we have that notion of everything, we're going to work with our minds. That's the basic principle of the Buddhist approach, that through meditation, we're going to cultivate awareness, we're going to work with our minds, we're going to look at our minds. Our minds are going to sort of, over time, disclose themselves to us. Our desires, our dreams, our visions, our neuroses, all of everything that we have, which is in our mind, we're going to become very familiar with as we go through the process of meditation and through the process of becoming more aware. And just actually, whether or not you're meditating or whether or not you cultivate awareness, just getting older, your mind doesn't go anywhere. So it's always there whenever you're running to work with it. And it's quite amazing that people who are even my venerable age have so many thoughts and concerns and worries and feelings about things that happened so long ago. Because their mind is continually disclosing itself to them. So all that we've thought is what has made us who we are. And what we think now, what we take seriously, what thoughts we believe, that determines where we're going. Of course, remember what Urgen Tulku said, that the quickest way to enlightenment is to not believe any thought whatsoever. So it's actually those thoughts that we believe that are creating a karmic path for us, that are we're becoming whatever it is that we're taking seriously. That's in our minds. And that's also how we got where we are. We took certain things seriously, for good or for not. Now, the Buddha's really not too worried about good thoughts at this point. Later on, it's more subtle and people just look at the whole process. But early on, good thoughts are fine. Buddha's quite rightly assumes that most people have their hands full just dealing with their negativities, let alone worried about their better ideas. We are what we think, having become what we thought. Like the wheel that follows the cart pulling an ox. Suffering follows an evil thought. Happiness follows a pure thought. So the Buddha has a very simple ethic, really. Happiness comes from virtue. And unhappiness and suffering come from lack of virtue. This is similar to what Socrates and Plato taught, and it is something that the Dalai Lama continually writes books about and has taught about his whole life. This connection between you want to be happy, then be virtuous, and the best virtue is to do things that benefit other people. Benefiting other people is sort of the highest of virtues. That's the Mahayana notion. So the more we do that helps other people, the more happiness comes into our lives, the more tight and stingy and self-absorbed we are, the more unhappiness enters our lives. And so it's that simple principle that sort of animates the ethics. Now, that's a kind of interestingly enough, when my philosopher friends were over, the philosophy professor and the person who was also from the academic world, that they would, that this was, I couldn't pass this one off on them at all. The idea that virtue and happiness were related is actually not the, and that reminded me that that's actually not the attitude of the modern world at all. Nobody really believes that they're going to be happy by being virtuous. People, more people by quite a number, believe that you're going to be happy by cutting corners, and everyone is always thinks they can cheat the law of karma, and apparently, from what you read, quite often people do. For a time, perhaps most of their lives, are able to cheat the law of karma. I mean, the earth doesn't, rarely does the earth open up and just swallow people whole. As much as that would be appropriate in terms of, instilling sterner adherence to ethical conduct. But alas, we have deferred these treatment of wrongdoers to the next world. It's quite clear as you read through the sutras, they have a very strong sense of things will go badly for you after death. They do not have at all the modern sense, which is really a very sliver of history that's had that view that, nothing happens, when you die, you die. Nobody until 50 years ago even had that idea. But the Buddhists are quite like everyone else who's religious. They always feel that there's some continuance of the soul in some way. And so that's also why virtue is important. It's good here and it's good there as well. Now, the interesting part, the next one, where he shifts into this idea of essentially what we would call turning the other cheek, that somebody does something bad to you, clearly bad to you, that we don't fight back, we don't push back. And in fact, we don't even look at situations. We try not even look at situations in that way. We let people off the hook. It's not quite turning the other cheek, but it's letting them off the hook, and not returning hatred with hatred, not returning hatred with anger. So hatred only ceases by love. So this is the probably one of the highest ethical teachings. This idea that soak it up. Somebody does something and you don't respond, you don't react, you don't give them their same energy. Now, generally, when people, are rude to you, you tend to be a bit rude back to them. So this is the non-pushing back, is what it's called in Buddhism. It's called don't push back. Just take it. And this is really superb advice. It's superb advice for many things, because if you do not push back, you gain a certain kind of moral advantage, which could be useful later on. Secondly, you don't escalate situations. And he actually encapsulates the best reason of all in the next verse, which says, "The world does not know that all things come to an end here. Those who do, their quarrels cease at once." So in other words, life is short. It's too short for arguments and quarrels and mixing it up with other people. I remember one time I read this article and they're interviewing this very ancient Lama from Tibet. And you know, what's the great truth do you have for us? And he says, we're here so short a time. Never mix it up with anyone. That was like his pith instruction. So that's the Buddhist idea. It's very pacifistic, in a like total like daily life basis, not especially avoiding war, which is always a good idea, but avoiding all kind of conflict at all. I mean, within reasonable limits, obviously. So yeah, that's very interesting ethic to meditate on. So the next section is also touches on one of the Buddha's essential keys to happiness and how one should live. And the Buddha has a sense of, you know, that of nobility or almost like aristocracy or kingship, which is appropriate for that period of time. And so noble people, the noble ones, he's always making this appeal to living up to the highest within us. And so he says that one who is mindful, senses controlled, moderate, careful, energetic, that sort of person, that's a noble person. Their senses are under control. They're moderate in how they live their life. They're mindful, and they're energetic. And these people cannot be overthrown by the temptations and evils of the world. On the other hand, those who live for sensation, senses uncontrolled, immoderate, unmindful, lacking energy, the tempter Mara breaks just like the wind breaks a frail tree. So these people continually succumb to temptation. So I'm reading this, and of course I can identify with both camps here. But it occurred to me that who cannot identify with the first camp? I mean, this is modern America. Living for sensation, senses uncontrolled, immoderate, careless, and lacking energy. I mean, that pretty much just, you know, you go out every day, that's what you see. Excuse me. Cough drop. So, disciplined life. The Buddha is a big fan of the disciplined life. And disciplined, virtuous life will positive attitude, and it will open up a lot of energy and lead to happiness. And it's all premised, as the next line indicates, on awareness. The path to the deathless is awareness, unawareness the path of death. They who are aware do not die. They who are unaware have never lived. Now, when we talk about awareness, there's all many different levels of what it is to be aware. But just this basic kind of waking up to the idea of enlightenment, to Buddhahood, to enlightenment. Feeling this kind of, also the same as feeling kind of this great open-heartedness, bodhicitta, a loving kindness that directed out towards everyone. These kinds of feelings are, you know, parts of awareness as we move towards this kind of ultimate or natural awareness. As we talk about in Dzogchen, the empty awareness of a mind that's emptied itself of conceptual preoccupations. So Unaware we're dead, aware we're alive, the basic point. And unaware we rack up suffering, we rack up sorrow, like, it's sort of like, it's a perpetual soap opera. And we take everything dead seriously like a soap opera. And everybody's cheating on everybody like a soap opera. And emotions are mixed, and it's a total mess. And there's not very much awareness. Everybody's caught in it. Nobody's ever stepping out of it. Nobody's ever saying, hey, let's take a break. This is crazy. This is, like a bad dream. Let's stop. But no, it's like a dream has a compulsion to it. It has to go on. Like it's like that. So that's samsara, and that's all unawareness. So unawareness and sorrow go hand in hand. Awareness and virtue and happiness go hand in hand. Buddha has great confidence in awareness, that if we're really aware, we will act naturally in a virtuous way. If we're really aware, happiness will just naturally ensue without us having to do anything to make that happen. So it's the not making things happen, but just be aware and letting things happen. That's the true key to happiness, whereas anything that we do on our own, pushing it, scheming, trying to, deeply analyze something to figure out what the best way to do it, all of that is pretty hit or miss. The best thing is just to simply rest in awareness and let the Buddha surprise you with events. Then there's a section here on who's worthy to put on the robes. That'll be more interesting at the Zen Center. So if you're going to proclaim yourself a Buddhist, which happens when you put on robes, or generally you're going to proclaim yourself in any way, or even if you don't proclaim yourself, even if you just consider yourself to be a practitioner, then you have to, think about it, take it seriously, and be disciplined and honest and such. And then we get to this very Zen-like end of the first of these 12 verses, which are called the twin verses. They're a famous set of verses. And this is, those who fail to distinguish the non-essential from the essential, and the essential from the non-essential, will, caught in thoughts and desires, fail to attain the essential. But those who correctly realize the essential is essential and the non-essential is non-essential, will, discovering the truth beyond words and desire, attain the essential. So that is our basic problem, actually. The basic human problem is that we can't distinguish between what's important and what's not important. And we spend a lot more time, we spend a ton of time on things that ultimately, karmically, in the terms of, waking up to enlightenment, being a practitioner, to liberating ourselves, are totally, if not useless, harmful. And we spend very little time on things that are worthwhile and helpful. And in that way, we fail to distinguish the non-essential, which we give great preponderance to, from the essential, which we do not give such care to. And similarly, that is because we make a lot of non-essential things, we mistakenly view them as really important. Like, for example, how much money there is in our bank account. Many people find this to be an object of great importance, but it is, from the point of view of liberation, totally unimportant. The Buddhists do not care at all. No one keeps track on Buddha level of bank accounts. So it's that kind of thing of not distinguishing worldly and spiritual, and understanding the place of the spiritual versus the worldly. It's not that we're not worldly, but it's the mixing the two up and putting the emphasis in the wrong place. Obviously, everyone who lives in the world has to be worldly to a certain extent, and there's no problem with that. It's the emphasis that we place on things that are not important, things that are temporal, things that are just passing, versus things that are long-lasting, like enlightenment. So if we correctly realize that awareness is the most essential aspect of life, and we realize that everything else is not quite as so important, then we'll discover the truth beyond words. The natural state.
Mm-hmm.
Beyond words and desire, the desireless natural state, enlightenment, nirvana, liberation, and that is, in fact, the real essential. And for the Buddha, the essential is, in fact, nirvana, is liberation. So that's those 12 verses are a good example of early instruction in combining the ethical and how the ethical leads to this kind of opening up to wisdom as well, and a happy life.
And it does seem to teach a sort of selfless quality too, in the way that he forgives his attackers. He gives his attackers like flowers, and that kind of, or like, and so that's one of the signs of his teachings is like selflessness.
Yeah, there's no self to react in the normal way of pushing back. No self, no one's offended. No one's offended, no one does anything.
I remember coming across some phrase, and it was, or something, I don't remember who or where, but if we get, the idea was that if we're getting upset with other people's words, then we have attachment to sound. We're attached to the sound of their voice, and just kind of like refocus the attention on just away from the meaning of their words and the intent. It seems very difficult, though. I feel like when somebody does when people do anything, we can pretty well discern their intention so easily. Is it just like ignoring their intention or holding their intention? Somebody says something, you get why they're saying it pretty quick. Just letting it come and go.
Well, I know those rare times when one is able to sort of take I have days sometimes, and I had one day, I remember recently where, for some reason, 3 or 4 people were rude, and I just was not in a mood to mix it up. I wasn't particularly virtuous or trying to be, but I just wasn't in a mood to mix it up with anyone, and so I just like, one person after another being rude to me, and afterwards I thought, man, that's a lot of rudeness in one day.
Yeah.
But it's good to have old people like that wandering around who, hard of hearing and don't get offended easily, because it soaks up some of the negative energy out there and the anger in the world. Particularly the anger. The media sometimes gets into stoking, although they've been a little calmer lately. Maybe explain.
So when he says when you're saying that awareness has this, he's got great faith and awareness to kind of help us just act naturally virtuous.
Right, it's sort of like Plato, if you know the good, then you'll do the good. Again, modern philosophers don't take that, don't believe that, but that's what Plato believed and Buddha believed that.
Why don't they believe it? What's their qualm?
Oh, modern philosophy is much more sophisticated, and so even as a simple rule or simple kind of piece of wisdom, it makes complete and perfect sense. As a philosophical proposition that works, like all the time, people quite often, and it's not reliable. So, for example, we know many people who are virtuous and they get mowed down. Virtuous people, but see, that's would be what they would say. But just the fact that they got mowed down doesn't mean they were less happy than the people who mowed them down. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
You're out there mowing people down. That's not a happy thing to be doing.
Mm-hmm.
That's a terrible thing. You're a total demon at that point. You're just a personification of hatred and anger, and you've imprinted yourself with the most powerful karmic imprint you can, and that's how can that not bear some consequence? So yeah, you pulling out of that completely. That is the Buddha's recommendation.
Mm.
And it's an interesting practice, because you have to look, you have this idea, which isn't, I like, you can easily assent to this. Yeah, that sounds great. I want to be somebody who's non-reactive, who doesn't let their buttons be pushed. But, as you go out in the world, so many things there to push your buttons. So interesting to practice the awareness of what is it that gets you upset. So when you read through the news, what is it that gets you upset? Does anything get you upset? Who gets you upset? What sort of things at work get you upset? What sort of things in your domestic life get you upset? What things about yourself get you upset? And so that's a whole category of look at to what it is that you're reacting to.
Mm-hmm.
And start to see and then once you see it, once you become aware of it, then you have possibilities to more creatively gauge the situation. Sometimes you're going to want to react, but other times you can just let it go. Mm-hmm. And the more you let it go, the more helpful that'll be.
So what if you took a really intentional and analytical approach, and with pen and paper you kind of went through the different areas of your life and said, okay, at work, once you did that, would that just, or is that the kind of thing that just...
We're more a naturalistic path, so rather than pulling out the pen and paper, I would just be aware of them as they come up.
Uh-huh.
And know them and let them go. Rather than then they get into some deeper analysis of who it is you don't like. I mean, I couldn't make a list at this point. So if you have a list, you need to do some more loving kindness. There shouldn't be a list. I mean, we're living in the moment. We shouldn't have lists of ongoing things that are irksome to us. We have to be letting all of that go. That's the whole idea that Buddha's talking about here, is just stop reacting. That forget that somebody did this to you. Just forget it. Whatever it is they did, forget it. Now, some things, of course, that's not going to work, but a lot of stuff. Just the general problem of general universal rudeness. This is very good for.
Mm-hmm. Well, the first line, the opening line about we are what we think, that's phrased differently. Where I've heard it also said the world depends on thought, or is because you could say we are what we think, and then like an anorexic person might think they're overweight, but they aren't, so they aren't really what they think. But yet their world depends on their thoughts, so they keep dieting and purging, type of deal. So it's that kind of thing where it's not really, it's more of a positive kind of a thing. We are what we think, because our world depends on thought. If we keep a happy heart, then we see, a happy world.
Well, there's actually two ways you could look at it. One is the way you just mentioned, where it's kind of like Yogacara, everything is mind, right? We are what we think, and everything is mind, and mind is really creating all these situations and possibilities. And our attitude determines how we are, whether we're happy or not. And so when we say what we think, it's not really the content of what we think, whether I'm thinking about, Neoplatonism, somebody else is thinking about, baseball. It's our attitude towards, the world, in terms of, openness or closedness, in terms of acceptance or rejection, of love or anger. And so that is, the attitude is determining what we are. So that's one way. But in another way, in a secondary way, who we are is determined by all the actions that we've taken. You can think whatever you want, but it's when you act, that's really what puts firmness into karma. And so that's why in the Nidanas you make that slit. You free yourself, you liberate yourself by not acting, by not doing, by not pushing back. So that restraint, that's the continual message you get in ever so many different words. Don't push back, restrain yourself, stay with it. And of course, meditation, when your mind is thinking all kinds of stuff, emotional content is rumbling through your mind as well, and you're not moving, you're just sitting there on the cushion, non-reacting. So this is a really big idea. If we don't act, we let the thoughts just come, then we break and liberate ourselves right there. Otherwise, good thought, good happiness, bad thought, bad thing, and in particular, our bad thoughts continually getting us into trouble. Of course, the non-doing of the Buddha is very different than the slacking of the modern kind of fake equivalent of non-doing. You read about all these people who basically are not doing much of anything, even though they might be working age, and that's why these verses here, where he talks about the difference between people who are disciplined and people who aren't disciplined. If you're going to not do, if you're going to restrain yourself, it's premised on the idea that what you're concerned about is not resolving things in terms of worldly status and etiquette, but you're concerned with liberation through awareness. So awareness is the key, and awareness is based on discipline. So the person who lives for sensation, with their senses uncontrolled, immoderate, careless, lacking energy, that person is that's slacking. The kind of the depressed, 400-pound person living at home with his parents. But here we have an energetic person who's working on liberation, and their non-doing is not in any way not engaging the world in that slacking sense, but it's being a peaceful observer of the world and a peaceful participant in the world, rather than somebody who's barreling through it ignorantly and unaware. So in Christianity, they say sin is death, and here the Buddha says unawareness is death.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the basic idea. Buddhist idea of sin is that it's unawareness. It's ignorance.
The unaware never.
You don't know what you're doing.
Yeah. Not even engaged in life.
Not that you're a kind, good person who just, someone didn't tell you about something, but no, you're deliberately ignoring everything around you because of your self-absorption.
So the unawareness here has the meaning of, because of like awake, you can be just generally, fundamentally awake and living in perception, but then self-absorption, that's the unawareness. You're unaware of anything outside of your own vision of your self. Is that the...
Exactly. And if you think about like a teenager, and this will be easy for Trish and Don who have one, and maybe your teenager's not like that. But generally speaking, they're rather self-absorbed. And so if you were to ask a teenager to describe like the buildings in the town, they couldn't do it. The only thing you actually would describe something they're interested in, like boys or girls, depending on what they care for, then they could describe that pretty well. But if you ask them to describe something they didn't care about, like buildings or houses or furniture or cars or artwork, there's a ton of stuff they're walking by every day that they're not paying any attention to whatsoever. And it's that kind of, there's a general, and when you talk to them, it's really hard to get that it's kind of, rather dense cloud of self-absorption, and they're only letting a few things kind of, pierce that cloud. So they're really hard to communicate with sometimes for that reason. Now, as we grow older, later on, we mature, we become less self-absorbed. And that seems to be a rather heightened period of absorption, and it is a kind of ignorance, and that's why it's scary raising teenagers.
But it doesn't necessarily go away with not being a teenager anymore. It doesn't.
Teenager
does it?
Adolescents have been creeping later into the American population. Sometimes it's questionable if anybody is not an adolescent in America. Where are the adults in America? That's a really good question.
So does that just transfer over into things like political ideology and religious fanaticism, or even just obsession with?
Well, yeah, definitely. Kind of this continual adolescence, wanting to be a bad boy forever, for example. But everybody, politics is generally self-obsessed. It's always my rights. Now, people have a different idea what rights is. My right, your right might be to own a gun. My right might be to have a decent income. But it's always about, me, and very little about altruism. Altruism is just not a popular idea in general. I saw a news article last week, and the president of Brazil, who's a sort of a blowhard, similar to our president, says he's apparently battling against, they have a term for it in Portuguese, but it basically meant do-gooders. He's had it with do-gooders, and the world of do-gooders is over now, and it's about the tough and those who can take care of themselves. That's what's important. And he's not going to have his government undermined by do-gooders, and so it's pretty wild. You get things that are common virtues for a long time get under basic attack and dismissed. this sort of universal bad boyism, rebellion against any kind of moral restraint other than might and power and media pull. So yeah, the Buddha is trying to create a different kind of person. And the interesting thing here in what he's doing is he's pitching it very individualistically. I mean, we have to change people one person at a time. He's not actually trying to lead any kind of social movement. People are coming to him and he's giving the same instructions to everyone. And these are the instructions that he's giving. That is, be mindful, be disciplined, be moderate, be careful, be virtuous, and that kind of basic way of living in the world, living as a gentle, virtuous person, which is not terribly difficult. That will create a happy life, and it'll allow you to have the time and inclination to pursue things that are beneficial to you, like meditation and understanding Dharma and such.
What's the
Another thing about when you talked about the he mistreated me, and you mentioned like turn the other cheek type of an attitude. I think, is that what they're talking about, like forming knots or seeds, to where like if you don't, if you feel that way and there's some sort of a grudge or something, that becomes some like a seed, and then, but if you don't let that form by like being open, selfless, loving, then does that prevent that knot or that seed? Is that the same type of idea?
Yeah, certainly. That's implicit in it. Later on, of course, it becomes a kind of a theory in Yogacara where every action has a seed. But I mean, that's basically understood all along, that everything has a consequence. That's the basic idea of karma. So it's like a seed. And you're right, you have a predisposition. So somebody out of the blue is like rude to you or does something to you. And then maybe you don't do anything right then, but you think, well, that bastard, and you kind of repressed it, and then you actually do have a seed there, because then what happens is that maybe you don't see that person for a while, but maybe later on, a week later, his name comes up, and somebody's saying, "Yeah, I saw so and so," and you go, "Yeah, that bastard," and that happens because you had that seed sitting there waiting for the right time when you can get a dagger in there and get a little bit of revenge back. And that's what we do a lot. So yeah, we do create these predispositions as soon as they get a chance. So we're full of these kind of things where, because we have resentments, because we didn't just let it go right then and there, or soon after, or at some point, then we have these predispositions that do appear, where we want to get even the score.
And so it seems a lot of the things we hear about later, like in the Mahayana, he didn't really teach it yet, but it was all there in this, like, the Dhammapada or something.
Well, in the early sutras, I think pretty much if you had just the early sutras, you could develop the rest of Buddhism from it. They don't bring anything. They just meditate on it. They start to understand different what's really being said here in new ways. But
and so you let that spark and say, yeah, I think that person is an evil human, and then you realize that, maybe that's not the best response. How do you then reverse it? It's not easy to go to every person that you felt that way about and say, I apologize and ask forgiveness.
well, this is where you have to use these expedient means that Buddhism provides. So the main thing is you have to clear your mind, because in fact, having lived a certain amount of time, you've accumulated a certain amount of, I mixed it up with quite a few people. You realize that, as I reflect back in meditation, I think, wow, over my whole life, all these situations where I could have let it go, but I didn't let it go, and so on and so forth and so on. But there are ways in which you kind of do like a whole system flush. So like doing a lot of mantra, doing a lot of loving kindness meditation is one that the Buddha, and we want to meditate on loving kindness towards all beings. He's talking about this in the early sutras. Later on, this becomes a practice of Mahayana Buddhism, but it's really there in the beginning. They're going to be loving kindness, feel loving kindness towards everyone, towards enemies, towards neutrals, towards friends. Just love everyone, and that kind of if we have that and we practice that, then that creates a bad environment for seeds that we may have created in the past to sprout. Okay. So yeah, we have mixed it up with a number of people, and they mixed it up with us and such. But because we're now full of loving kindness towards everyone, it's it's all right. We were totally real kind and loving towards them, and it's all forgotten. And so that's the kind of way in which we kind of like take care of them all at once by using the roundup of loving kindness to quench them.
Is that like taking care of the future too? Taking care of setting yourself up not to create that same kind of karma again and again?
Yeah, definitely. If we feel that way towards people, then we're less likely to mix it up with people going forward. And generally, if we have that kind of attitude, that we're relaxed, we're loving, we're happy to see people, we're not using people, we're actually kind of, helpful to people, we're positive, we're cheerful. I mean, if you can actually adopt some form of that type of being in the world, then you don't tend to mix it up so much. I mean, well, who wants to mix it up with a cheerful person? I mean, it's foolish. The times I got mixed it up with people in my past were not because I was being kind, helpful, cheerful, and relaxed. It was because I was in high-stress situations, and they were in high-stress situations, and we were trying to get things done, and they were trying to get things done, and, that whole thing. So it was, they were tense situations. Generally, cheerful, positive people don't, just get along with other cheerful, positive people, so there's no problem. So we get a different kind of world once we have that kind of attitude. And that does help in the future in that way. Well, we have reached that magic hour, and thank you all for joining us tonight. And we will continue next week, same time, same station.
Thank you, Bruce.
We dedicate merit here. By this merit, we all obtain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings.